It's time now to say goodbye to the Middle Ages. It's been nice, it's been fun, but everything comes to an end. The Middle Ages come to an end, again, just before the Renaissance, which you're going to learn about in the next course. Here, I'll just talk about a couple of the things that happened at the very end, and then we will say goodbye to all the princes and princesses and the knights. The Black Death is a plague that hits Europe in 1347, and it kills about half or a third of all Europeans, depending on where it hits. It comes from an area around the Black Sea, and it arrives in Europe in Italy. It's an infection, it's a disease that infects fleas who then bite rats, and the rats then bite people, and that's how it spreads. It arrives in Italy, quickly spreads throughout all the rest of Europe. You see a map just to my side here about where it goes. Now, medieval Europeans didn't know why this was happening. They didn't have the understanding of science that we do. So they came up with their own explanations. One of them, a very popular one, was that God had caused the plague, that he was upset with them, and people had different responses, different ways of trying to make God happy so that the plague would stop. One of those responses are these fellows you see right next to me here. These guys went all throughout Europe, and they thought that God was unhappy that people had gotten too comfortable, and that in order to make God happy, they needed to walk around and whip themselves. And by whipping themselves, they would create pain, and they would show God that, listen, we're suffering, and that would stop the plague. So these guys would walk around whipping themselves, hoping to stop the plague that way. Another cause that people blamed for the plague, besides God, were, strangely, Jewish people. Medieval Europeans, this strange rumor goes around and catches on that Jewish people are poisoning the wells, and that's what is causing the Black Death. And so this has no basis. In fact, this is this crazy conspiracy theory, but a lot of Europeans believe it, and it creates a big feeling of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism means hostility towards Jewish people. And there are areas in Europe where Jewish people are rounded up, just like the Holocaust that's going to happen much later in World War II that you probably are familiar with. Jewish people are going to be rounded up in these medieval towns and killed in large groups because, again, the thought was, hey, you started this Black Death. So the anti-Semitism that exists and that it is in full strength during Hitler's time wasn't invented then. It has a long history dating all the way back to the 1300s. The most significant effect of the Black Death, other than the casualties it causes, are the effects it has on the economy. The Black Death makes the supply of workers go way down, right? There's way fewer people alive, so there are way fewer people to do the work. At the same time, there's not that much of a demand for the food that people are growing because there aren't enough people to eat it. So both of those things, the supply of workers going down, the demand for food going down, makes rich landowners a lot less rich because now they can't sell food for as much, and their workers are demanding higher wages because there are fewer of them. The supply and demand effects of the Black Death cause the economy to greatly change. Serfs are freed, peasant income rises. The Black Death, if you survived it, was actually an economic had economic benefits for regular folks, and it lessened the economic power of the elites. The Black Death also caused a decline in the power of the church. Again, there are less people. The church wasn't able to stop the Black Death, so people don't have the same unwavering faith in it anymore. Another thing that causes the decline of church power is that from 1378 to 1417, there are actually two popes that are fighting with one another. One of them lives in Rome, and one of them lives in France. There's lots of politics behind it that you don't really need to worry about. Just, there were politics behind this election of this one pope. Two popes become pope. They both call themselves the pope. One lives in Italy, one lives in France. They're fighting each other. They kick each other out of the church. They call each other the Antichrist, and it takes a long time for it to get settled. And that disunity, that fractious relationship between these two guys sort of show everyone that, or rather make everyone sort of skeptical, cynical about the Pope in general. The 100 Years' War between England and France actually lasted, as you can see from the dates, for over 100 years. And it's essentially a fight over territory. England is trying to conquer France. France is not interested in being conquered. And for a while, for a long time, it's going England's way. By 1429, England had conquered northern France. But into the story at that point comes someone you might have heard about. Her name is Joan of Arc. She is a French peasant girl. Again, as you can see from the dates by her name right here, that's the length of time she lived. That's her birth year to her death year. So she's not very old. She meets the French king. She convinces him to let her lead this army. She, by all accounts, is very charismatic. Everyone who met her said that she was really awesome. She dresses up in a suit of armor, leads the troops in the field, and wins this big battle at Orleans. She then is captured. The English end up with her, and the English burn her. The English burn her at the stake. They accuse her of all sorts of things, like dressing in men's clothing, and putting on a suit of armor and fighting, and just being a bad person, of having visions and demons. Like, they accuse her of all sorts of nasty things. Joan of Arc, she's very famous. Essentially, she is a peasant girl who, at a very young age, leads the French army in this victory over the English. And even though she is captured and executed at a very young age, France does kick England out of the continent and become, sort of its own country. So she's remembered very fondly in France and all over today. All right, it's time to wrap up the Middle Ages now. We leave France with a strong monarchy that emerges after the 100 Years of War. Their kings are very in control. We leave England after the 100 Years' War. They plunge into a civil war called the War of the Roses, which is going to end when Henry VII is going to win. He'll become the King of England. His kid is Henry VIII, who's very famous, and then Elizabeth, and people that you're more familiar with, again, that you're going to learn about next year. Spain undergoes a real interesting change at this point. Remember, I kept emphasizing that they were ruled by the Muslim empires and that it was a Muslim country for the longest time. Well, a couple little independent Christian nations unify. They unify. Their king and their queen get married, and they drive the Muslims out of Spain. They conquer Spain, make it a Catholic nation. They actually formally expel all Muslims from Spain. They say like all Muslims must leave Spain. And they actually also say that all Jewish people must leave Spain, that Spain is only going to be for Christians now. And it's King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella who are the ones who marry, unite their kingdoms, and then conquer all of Spain. This is the same Queen Isabella who is going to finance Christopher Columbus. Again, we'll learn about that next year. She's famous for that. Then also in Russia, we'll leave off Russia. They'd been ruled, since we last saw them very briefly in the last chapter, they'd been ruled by the Mongols. Ever since, Genghis Khan and all of them had conquered Russia, and they've been ruling them for centuries. Well, the princes of Moscow at this point in history create a Russian state. They sort of end Mongol rule, create a new Russian state that is then going to expand and going to become the Russia that you study next year. All right, see you Middle Ages.